love it when people have Ivy League educations and big personalities. When those two things come together, you're usually in for a good time, and that's what we have with Thomas Woods. Tom is a well-known social media personality that has his show, The Tom Woods Show, that has a great audience. His flow of thinking, his humor, his way of presenting information, looking at what's going on in the world today. We could use a little humor sometimes, but he also has very sharp mindset and information that I believe you need to know to deal with the challenges that we face in the world today. So enjoy my interview with Thomas Woods. Tom, thanks so much for taking the time today. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
My pleasure, Patrick. Thank you.
So let's start with your background, maybe even your academic background, what your education was like, what you studied, and how you got to be doing what you're doing today.
Well, I have the educational background of the sort of person who spends his time destroying civilization, but I'm doing the opposite. I'm trying to maintain it. I have an undergraduate degree from Harvard, where I studied history, and then my PhD is from Columbia University, also in history. I have done some work in economics, but I'm primarily a historian. But I did learn something very important during those years, which is that, yes, indeed, I did learn some things in the formal instruction, but I learned that if I really, really want to learn things, I'm going to have to find books that are not assigned in the classroom. If I really want to know the full story or stuff that's been left out, I have to dig around on my own. And one of the nice things about being at Harvard was that you had the largest private library in the world, and all the books that I might want to read, well, no problem. They're always sitting there on the shelf, ignored, so I was able to give myself my own private education while I was there.
Well, and I'm fascinated by the fact that, Harvard, Columbia, these Ivy League institutions, but as you said, you're reading the books that other people weren't that interested in. So how did you get along in that environment? Seemingly that you have maybe more of a shall I call it, libertarian view as compared to what the kind of indoctrinated views are at these institutions. So what was that like?
Well, it's kind of like the advice I give to young people in this situation, which is to seek out the like-minded people. So we had an alternative, let's say, student publication that I wrote for, and we all got to know each other. We realized we were the dissenting voices on campus, and we helped to keep each other sane. And this is why I get impatient with people who say to you or to me that you're just preaching to the choir. Well, number one, I don't think we are. But secondly, even if we were just preaching to the choir, the choir needs to be preached to. Yeah. And I don't know any church where the pastor says, all right, I'm about to preach so the choir can go out and have a cigarette. They also need to be preached to. Like the people who were, let's say, the black sheep of the campus, we needed to be kept sane. And we did that by writing and by inviting dissident voices to speak on campus. So that was what more or less got me through it.
And history, why history?
Oh, I'll tell you the exact reason. I was actually planning to do some kind of math degree, if you can believe that. And then one day as a freshman, I was heading to the dining hall, and there was a group called the Friends of the Spartacus Youth League hawking their newspaper there. And it was called the something worker, I forget what it was. A Workers' Vanguard, it was called. And they were celebrating, I don't know, something having to do with the Bolshevik Revolution. And I thought, the Bolshevik Revolution? I mean, how do they not know all the atrocities, and that that Lenin was having people shot and by firing squads, and that there were already camps with between 50 and 70,000 people in them even before Stalin got in. Like, how do they not know this? How do they not know that the secret police under Lenin was 16 times larger than it had been under the Tsars? How do they not know? Maybe they just don't know. Right. Maybe it's a lack of knowledge, but don't worry about this. Old Woods will straighten them out. Oh, naive old 18-year-old Woods went up to that table and started talking to them, and it just seemed like no matter what I said, it just didn't matter. Doggone it. So I became fascinated with these people. Now, normal people just went on to dinner like they weren't even there. Normal people. Right. Not old Woods here. I'd be sitting there through dinner, and halfway through I'd be thinking, what can I say to them? And I'd run back out talking. So I started reading more, and this got me more interested in history because of the history of communism. So that was kind of what, it wasn't my high school history teacher or any of those sorts of stories. It was dealing with these people in particular. So then I went to one of their meetings. I just had to see this.
Right.
So I went to one of their meetings. This was 1991. And they were passing around, this is absolutely the God's honest truth. They were passing around a collection plate asking for donations to help keep the Soviet Union together.
You have to be making that up.
No, that is absolutely the truth, and I am happy to report to you, Patrick, that the $12.18 in that plate did nothing to keep it.
This is great. Wow. So, but then to get a PhD in history, I mean, so you just went all in on this.
I did because I decided I wanted to be in academia, and then eventually I decided I would much rather just be on my own as an independent scholar. And in the age of the internet, I'm able to do that. I'm able to make a very nice living, not having to deal with any bureaucratic politics, not having to deal with envious coworkers or committee assignments or anything like that. But I did want to be in academia because I liked the lifestyle. I mean, I couldn't believe I would get paid for reading books that I liked and writing about things that were interesting to me. And plus, standing up in front of a classroom, I mean, I had been in drama since middle school, so I'm such a ham. I mean, I'd love to do that. That's no problem. So it was like the perfect job for me.
Wow. So then you finished your academic career, and what did you do?
For a while I was paying off some student loans, I went and taught at a community college on Long Island. They actually paid the best of any job I applied for. I was able to really get those. It's some kind of scam going on Long Island. The firefighters, the police, they all get paid these enormous salaries. So I figured if you can't beat them, join them. So I took that salary while I was there. I started paying down my debt. And then I realized I had an opportunity to go be a resident scholar at something called the Ludwig von Mises Institute, named after the great economist Mises, who was one of the most prolific and brilliant economists ever. And I could go there and just work on what I wanted to work on. I knew I was a hard worker. I was churning out like a book a year, a couple of them New York Times bestsellers. And so they said, why don't you come down here and you can do whatever you want and we're gonna back you. So there's no reason to say no to that. So I was able to do that, but by 2010, for family reasons, we left there and went live somewhere else. And that's when I realized I couldn't, and this, by the way, this is relevant to people now, in this day and age, wondering, what am I gonna do? We got crazy economic policies everywhere. We get this crazy, unchecked, so-called public health establishment running roughshod over every decent thing. You know, what am I supposed to do? How do I protect myself against this? I realized after 2010, I was gonna have to generate my own income somehow. I couldn't rely on anybody else. I was gonna have to generate my own income. Now, I could generate that by running myself ragged, giving speeches all over the country, but I had young children and I didn't want to be away while they were growing up. So after I got some advice from somebody said to me, think about what it is that you're good at. Why do people follow you? Why do they like you? What is it about you that has generated, readers, a YouTube audience, blog readers? Like, what has done that? And the answer was that I would blast to smithereens the standard kind of 7th grade textbook version of various historical events. And people just loved this because the standard 7th grade textbook will tell you that the federal government is a wonderful progressive force and that what we need is more centralization of power, and that anybody who wants power more decentralized is evil and wicked, probably supports slavery. That this is about as charitable as they would ever be to anyone who disagreed with them. And so there were certain presidents we were supposed to admire. And when I was a freshman in college, one bit of advice I got was to read a book by Paul Johnson called Modern Times. And the person who recommended this to me, this is a student, said, when you get to the American history chapters, just be prepared because you're gonna find that the presidents you were told were terrible deadbeats were actually the best ones. And the ones you were told were the great saviors were terrible. I thought, okay, well, sure, I'll check this out. And I never looked at the world the same way. So I do that kind of thing. So this person said to me, you're already doing books, you're doing this and that. What if you did courses online, in non-PC US history or economics or related fields, and you made like your own dashboard university out of that? And, well, maybe, yeah, I could. So I could work from home with something that I was good at and not have to fly all over the country. So in 2012, I launched what's called Liberty Classroom. And you know what they say about new businesses tend not to last 3 years, or there's some terrible statistic about how few of them last. 9 years later, that site's still going strong because there are a lot of adults out there who feel like they suffered from what I like to call educational malpractice.
Yeah.
So it was from that moment on that I realized it is possible now that we have the internet, even with all the restrictions and the deplatforming and all these problems that are very real, it's still quite possible to make a comfortable living without having to deal with any political BS from anybody. And so I've become kind of a master of that since then.
Well, one of the reasons I was really excited to speak to you, given your background and your study of history and what you know about economics. I mean, the Mises Institute is something. I mean, on human action. I mean, the Tree Killer. Big book, but a masterpiece. So you sort of have a context that allows you to, I think, in a very unique way, see what's going on in the world right now. And for me, I feel like what I'm experiencing is unprecedented. As you start to cite, the censorship that's going on, we've always had financial irresponsibility when it comes to government. I think it was P.J. O'Rourke said, giving power to politicians is like giving whiskey and keys to teenagers. But now I think it's gotten to a whole other level of irresponsibility. We look at the wealth gap widening. We look at civil unrest that's going on in a lot of our cities. I feel like we're in an unprecedented circumstance here, at least in my experience in my lifetime. How do you see it?
Well, likewise. I mean, obviously we've had periods in the past of great leaps forward in let's say, government spending. But normally those ratchet back, so there's an increase in spending during the world wars, for example. But after the war is over, well, you obviously can't be spending money on men who aren't overseas anymore. So the budget ratchets back. It may not ratchet back as far as to where it was before, but it ratchets back. But right now, what we're seeing is an increase in spending that doesn't seem to have a built-in ratcheting back aspect to it. That there is no end of the war, so to speak, coming. So we had, maybe a $4 trillion federal budget before 2019 to 20. Now it's like $6.5 trillion. Maybe it'll ratchet back to $5 trillion. But even that, I mean, there's a 25% increase. So our standard of living declines when command over resources shifts from private hands that are looking to maximize consumer welfare and into government hands where they're looking to maximize the demands of certain constituencies. That's not going to increase our welfare overall. So I'm concerned that that's just not going to stop. And not to mention, it's also being fueled by so-called modern monetary theory, which at least leaves the average person with the implication that there are no real resource constraints that we're up against, that the federal government can always just print the money. Now, some people maybe caricature modern monetary theory, but that's what most people are walking away with. That's what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez thinks it means. So anytime you say to her, how could we possibly have this Green New Deal? You want to retrofit every single building in the entire country? Anytime you say that to her, the answer is, well, we have modern monetary theory. So you're absolutely right. I can't imagine there's been a time in history quite like this one.
So on that, because I hear a lot of people use the term modern monetary theory, but I yet have anybody to really describe what that means, except we can be completely irresponsible in our debt and our spending, and in the way that we devalue the dollar, and there won't be any consequences. And it just doesn't make any sense to me. I can't find any characteristics of it or argument for it that have any sense or semblance of rationality.
Well, what they'll say is that we don't deny that there could eventually be price inflation if you just keep printing money. Like, we get that could eventually happen. Their view is that there's just so much slack in the economy still to be taken up that all the new money will just bring that slack back into use, and so it's not going to create price inflation. But there are a million things wrong with that. I mean, how are you going to direct the money to print? They're not going to be able to direct the money to precisely the parts of the economy that have slack in it. in practice, especially when handled by politicians who aren't exactly known for their appreciation of subtlety, it's just going to turn out to be what, I mean, even Keynesianism, the ideas of the economist John Maynard Keynes in the 1930s, strictly speaking, according to Keynesian theory, it's when the economy is in a downturn that you want to increase spending and maybe increase the debt. But when things are good, that's when you pay down debt and you lower the spending back a bit. But you notice how that second part never got implemented.
Right.
So no matter what the theory is, even if it's sound, in the hands of politicians, it will be deformed into its worst possible caricature.
Well, and listen, I'm not an economist, but I have to imagine that when you're just printing money without there being any correlating value creation, to it, and that you continue to just expand debt with not even a faking the indication that you want to pay it off, or you want to eventually balance a budget. It just can't be sustainable. It's just a matter of time before the whole thing has to collapse.
Well, it's easy to see if you just think about a desert island. And it's you and one other person, and or maybe it's three people. One person's a storekeeper, and two of you are customers. And on the shelf there are 10 grapefruits, and there's $10 circulating in the economy. And then suddenly they say, let's improve our prosperity. We're going to increase the number of dollars in the economy to 20. But there's still only 10 grapefruit in there, so
right.
It doesn't matter. Right? So now the grapefruit would be $2 instead of $1.
Yeah.
So there's no way to. I mean, I know it seems like because our economy is much bigger than a desert island, it's more difficult to see some of these effects. But they're still there. And sometimes the effect is that prices should be falling in absolute terms, but they don't. They rise a little. But they were falling all through the 19th century and into the early 20th century a little bit. They were falling. So now sometimes if prices are more or less stable or inflation is 1 or 2%, we think, oh, this is amazing. But in the 19th century, prices fell. And there are all kinds of scare stories about deflation that you should not believe for a second. These are all people who lose from deflation. The average person gains.
Right.
Because in the 19th century, if you wanted to save for the future, all you had to do was accumulate precious metal coins. When they circulated as money, that's all you had to do was accumulate them because they would hold or increase their value. Today, you can't do it. Only an idiot would save for the future by just putting dollar bills in a bank account, because in 20 years, he's lost 1/3 of his value. So now what do people have to do in the 21st century? Well, instead of in the stupid backward 19th century that we're supposedly so superior to, they have to go into the stock market, and they don't know anything about the stock market, or buy bonds. They don't even know what they're doing, but they have to do this just to break even. It is not immediately obvious that for the average person, this is an improvement.
Yeah, and this is the scenario is that staying in cash, your cash is losing value every single day. And it's interesting, and this is the point I used to make with my kids, in talking about money. The desert island scenario, I used to say to them, imagine you have $1 billion in cash and you're on a desert island with just you. What are you gonna do with the money? It's got no value, in and of itself. What are you gonna do? You're gonna leave it on the beach, you're gonna go look for some food, you're gonna go build some shelter. The money has no inherent value unless there's something produced that you can trade it for, which, so just creating money doesn't create more value, it just devalues each of the dollars that are in circulation. But the thing that concerns me, and I'd love to see what concerns you most right now, but one of the things I see that I think is an untenable problem is the wealth gap that's forming. Right, and there's, we're really losing the middle class. The shutdowns destroying small businesses who are the freest people in the country, and now you've got a lot of wealth at the top, and then a big gap, and then a lot of people who are very poor. How do you see, or what concerns you most? What do you think the most threatening thing is that's happening right now?
Well, Thomas Sowell used to point out that in fact, if you look closely, what's actually happening was that the middle class was more than not moving even higher. That was where they were going. But now with these shutdowns and the destruction of so many small businesses, I'm not sure what the trend is. But I do know that there is a huge number, like tens and tens of millions of Americans, who are so alienated from everything and everyone that they're not going to believe a thing authority tells them. They've just lived through this enormous ordeal with COVID, and they were told you got to stay 6 feet away, you got to wear a mask when you're taking a jog. In Alachua County here in Florida, they came up with this rule for retail businesses. It was something like you can have one person in your business for every 1,000 square feet. And when they were asked, where did you come up with that number? What scientific principle was guiding that? The spokesman said, oh, well, we just wanted the math to be easy for everybody. So in other words, we pulled that out of our you-know-where. And I have been tracking this pretty closely, and it seems to me now you can graph lockdown stringency, or when mask mandates went into effect, or any of these other aspects of the lockdown regime against health outcomes, and the results are completely random. And they shouldn't be random. Florida should be a giant Florida-shaped graveyard right now.
Right.
But it's not, and the thing is, they don't even have an answer for this. They don't have an answer. This guy, Andy Slavitt, who's this bozo who's been advising Biden on COVID, he went on MSNBC. MSNBC is going to throw him softballs 9 times out of 10. They ask him one tough question, and he stammers his way through the whole thing. They say, well, how come California and Florida seem to be doing roughly the same, and yet California was insanely shut down, and Florida, people are going to concerts and comedy shows, and like, what's going on? And his answer was, well, there are some aspects of this virus that are just a little bit beyond our ability to understand, which, by the way, Patrick, was all I was asking them to say all this time. Just admit it.
Yeah.
It's going to take years to figure out what the heck just happened. But no, they've got all the answers. You have to ruin your life and ruin your business and burn through your savings, and we'll let you know. Now, when they gave us that 15 days to flatten the curve thing, I think a lot of people thought that's reasonable. 15, it's a sacrifice, but we're going to pull together. We don't know what we're dealing with. Let's see if we can take a pause and figure everything out. And there was some emphasis on, look, we know we're asking a lot of you, but let's just get through this and see what's what. Now, around the world, it's things like, yeah, we're going to have you in your houses for another 3 months, we'll get back to you. Like this has been normalized. I don't see how people persist through this. There are people whose lives have been ruined who can't tell their stories. To me, that's the dangerous thing. Because if you tell your story, then you're going to be shamed, right? Well, what are you saying? You don't believe Dr. Fauci? Well, like, what are you saying? You don't care about old people? No, that's not what I'm saying, you doofus. I'm saying that there is more of concern in this world than simply one virus. There are entire societies. There are other health problems that went undiagnosed because everybody was panicked about COVID. There's a ton of problems. There's food shortages in parts of the world because of supply chain disruptions. There's health problems. We've got, even the New York Times said, you're going to have 2 million excess deaths from tuberculosis, HIV, and other malaria because of, again, supply chain disruptions and all sorts of problems in the developing world. It's a fiasco, and as you say, here in the U.S. with the shutdowns, that obviously hurt the middle class worse, because Walmart and Target are doing just fine, and Amazon's doing just fine. It's almost like they designed it that way. I'm not saying they did, but for heaven's sake, if they were to design it, if they were to rig the system worse, how could they do a better job? What would they do differently? So to me, this is the big thing, and you would be crazy in the next election not to make a direct appeal to those voiceless people who had everything they poured their lives into taken away for nothing. None of these mitigation efforts did a darn thing. You can't see any pattern anywhere. In fact, I have a little site where I call it "Pin the Mask Mandate on the Country." Now, chart, and I want you to show me. I just pick, where do you think the mask mandate went into effect? And you think, oh, it must be where the cases were really high, then they had masks and then they came down. Nope, it never is. It's never that. It's always some random spot. Or in the Midwest, I have pin Thanksgiving on the Midwest, because of course we were told, don't you misbehave. Misbehave means visiting your family. Don't you misbehave by visiting your family at Thanksgiving, because we know what will happen. Okay, well here's what the Midwest looks like. It goes like this. Okay, where's Thanksgiving on that chart? You think it's up here? It's over here. But no one's going to guess that, because they've all been taught that bad behavior is what accounts for what's going on. It's this unbelievable hubris of what we laughingly call our public health establishment in which cares nothing about economics, which thinks economics is just selfishness and greed and profit, even though economics is what binds us together, is providing for each other, finding out what other people want and giving it to them. And this amazing lattice work of producers on each level of production, coordinating production until we have this amazing abundance of consumer goods. It's an extraordinary example of global cooperation. Yeah, that's an extraordinary, amazing thing that no kid in any school classroom is taught to appreciate. They're taught how a bill becomes a law. You know, they're immediately taught how government works. They're not taught how that ham sandwich gets on your plate. But that's the incredible thing. And that's the thing they think we can just discard and forget about, and that's stupid and backward. And the result has been they wreck the economy and they have nothing to show for themselves health-wise.
Yeah, you know, it's amazing when you said we just need 2 weeks to flatten the curve. I remember that. And I remember, and now I'm realizing, man, they really like did the boiled frog, right? They got you to do 2 weeks, and they got you to do a little bit more, and they got you to do a little bit more. And next thing you know, like, if people are just, you know, accepting it too willingly, and now, you know, we've got a really, I think, challenging and I think threatening circumstance. So, given this sort of chaotic scenario, and I say chaotic only because you know, I'm seeing that there's a huge resistance to all this also, right? There's a lot of people who are really upset about the censorship, about you know, the loss of civil liberties, and I believe that, you know, there's, you know, economic upheavals on the horizon. So where do you think this is going to go? You know, how do you think this ends up? Do you have any? I know you can't maybe say for sure, but do you speculate about what you think might happen?
Well, the thing is, there are so many potential repercussions of this. So some of them we won't even know were caused by what was done in 2020. So for instance, in the UK, they are estimating that potentially 60,000 or more people will die from preventable cancers in the future, because you know, their procedures were not necessary. Let's say they weren't essential, or because people were spooked into not going to the hospital when they needed to go to the hospital. But the thing is, those people are not going to die in the next 10 minutes. The point is, instead of living another 20 years, they're going to live another 3 or 4. But when 3 or 4 years from now, a bunch of people die from cancer, no one's going to say this is because of the lockdowns caused by the control freaks. They'll just say, oh, well, that's a shame, those people died of cancer. So the thing is, there's so many examples of this that we really need like a book, a documentary, whatever, just to chronicle that alone. Yeah. But also, I mean, you have a lot of very vulnerable people now. I mean, even before 2020, there are a lot of surveys that you'll see on financial websites about if you had, let's say, a $500 emergency, would you be able to pay it out of your own pocket? And you're seeing results like 40% of people would not be able to cover that. They'd have to go borrow the money from somewhere or work extra, or whatever. They don't even have that. Now go through this, now go through 2020, and you have people who, they rely on a little business that has very, very thin margins, and they've just been told to hang on and hang on and hang on. Or what if you own a small venue, like here in Florida, even in Florida, that's been mostly open. The problem is the small venues for music, they need bands touring. But it's great for Governor DeSantis to say you can open your venue, but if there's no band that's going to perform, that doesn't do you any good. Imagine you poured your whole life into that, and now that's taken away. There'd be so many, and so there are bands out there that I know where they say some of the venues that we're trying to book now for tours in the future don't exist anymore. So there's going to be a barren landscape in so many parts of our lives. So I feel like it's a time for people of means to help out those things that they love and that they don't want to see disappear. Like there's a small venue here in Florida, and they had a GoFundMe. I've never even been to this venue. Maybe I'll go someday. It's an hour from my house. Maybe I'll go, maybe I won't. But I feel better knowing that they exist. So I gave them a pretty good chunk of dough because I didn't want them to close their doors. Like this is the kind of thing, these are the people who are in this together. Is somebody like me and that venue owner. We're in this together. I'm going to help him out, not by taking money from somebody else, or or creating a lot of debt that somebody else is going to have to deal with in the future. Yeah, I know that anyone can do that. Government can do that really easily. But taking from my own consumption and saying, here, you and I are in this together, and this is these things that they've done to us. We're in this together. So yeah, how do you handle this? Like, how does the average person move forward after this? I mean, I was worried that nobody would want to be an entrepreneur after this, because if you could be told on a moment's notice that you have to either be shut down or operate at a laughable 25% capacity. I think Disneyland is allowed to operate now at a 15% capacity to in-state people, and you're not allowed to scream on the rides.
That can't be true? Is that true? You can't.
Oh, that is true. You can Google California Scream rides. It'll come right up. You're not allowed to scream. I don't know how they're going to enforce that. Why did you get that $100 fine? I screamed on a roller coaster. Crazy, absolutely crazy. So I mean, at first I thought no one's going to who would want to open a business, especially a restaurant?
Yeah.
I mean, restaurants operate on such thin margins. Somebody gets his steak done this much wrong and they have to throw it away. I mean, they operate on very thin margins. Who would open one? I have been surprised that actually entrepreneurship has exploded during this time, which did surprise me. Partly because maybe they thought they could get some of these special benefits through COVID. I'm not sure. People have to start thinking and realizing no one's coming to save you. Like, there's nobody coming. You got the stimulus checks. That's it. No one's coming to save you. The only person who can do you any good is yourself. Like, you have to start thinking of yourself in a different light from how you've thought of yourself before. Now, I don't like these mindset courses. You spend $497 to teach you that you're made of what it takes and come on, like, just stop it, knock that off. But I do think there is something to mindset. And back when I was a college professor, the idea that I would create something and sell it to the world never entered my mind. It never occurred to me that I would sit here and have a membership website that generates regular revenue for me each time period, so that I have some freedom, I have some stability in my life. It doesn't matter what's going on out there in the world, I'm doing well. That mindset shift of, instead of thinking of, I'm somebody who buys the things other people market, and instead of thinking, wait a minute, those other people are not part of a different species from me, right? And there's no reason I can't also create something. That's the way you have to start thinking. So, for example, I bet a lot of people watching this have gone to a car wash where they say, all right, you can get your car washed for $8, but for $18, you can get all the car washes you want for a month. You think, well, I'd be crazy not to get the $18. That's exactly the model that I have, where every month they know X number of people are paying them $18. And it takes away some of that anxiety of thinking, okay, I made one sale and I just have to hope these people come back next month. You don't have to hope. So for one thing, first thing that I like people to think about is, yeah, you could go into the stock market. That's true. I'm not dissing that. I'm in the stock market a little bit myself. But sometimes stocks go down and they can stay depressed. And if that happens at exactly the wrong window in your life, that can be very unfortunate. So I don't want to put all my eggs in that basket. I think Bitcoin is doing pretty well and likely to keep doing well. But at the beginning of the pandemic, it fell to like $6,500. You've got to be prepared for that possibility. So I have plenty of eggs in that basket, but not all of them. The way I look at it is, given the uncertainty of the future world, given where the economy might go after all this beating that it's taken, given that we have a public health establishment that's been allowed to run roughshod over everybody, and who knows what they'll do next time, what I want to have is a Fauci-proof lifestyle. That's what I want.
You're heading right where I want to go. I'm very curious about the Fauci-proof lifestyle, because that's really the whole thing. I mean, we're defining the problem for sure, and it is disturbing, and I think it's uncertain as to where it goes and how long it sustains, and and what the ramifications are. I will just echo that. I think there's every argument at this point that the cure is worse than the disease. And more time is going to bear that out. But now the question is, what do we do? And you're hitting upon it. I think the explosion in entrepreneurism is that a lot of people were out of work or maybe decided I want to take responsibility for my own my own income. As you said, no one's coming to save my intellectual mentor was Nathaniel Branden, and the second pillar of self-esteem that he used to teach was self-responsibility, and he'd say no one is coming to save you. You have to take responsibility, and that I think is where things can and should go. So how do you create to use your term, the Fauci-proof future where you're secure in uncertain times?
Well, first of all, we have to note that most people, almost everybody coming out of K through 12 schooling, has no knowledge of how to do this. They've been in the government schools, most of them, for 13 years. And what they've been taught to do is how to apply for college. Then college, 4 years of that. And then after that, they've just been taught to sit and wait by the phone until somebody calls you because they think you're useful. Okay, well that model does work. And not everybody should be an entrepreneur. So I don't mean to say that no one should do that, but I do think that people ought to be given choices, and they ought to be trained in how to take advantage of these choices. And coming out of traditional school, unless you were homeschooled in certain homeschool curricula, you have no idea what to do, like how to use any of these online platforms, or how to build an audience, or how to use an email list to make money. And I mean, there are all kinds of things that if you knew them when you were 18, you would be on top of the world by the time you were 30, on top of the world, and no one's going to teach them to you because the schools, like all government agencies, are stuck in like 1977. So they're still teaching you whatever the heck they were teaching back then. So the way I look at it is, if I were a stock maven, maybe I could navigate the stock market in a way that would provide for me in perpetuity. And I know there are people who can do that. But the thing is, I don't have the time or the ability to learn all that stuff and to be confident enough in it to have that be my particular strategy. I get that it works for some people, and I have nothing but praise for them. But for the average person who might feel a little hesitant to take that step, the way I think of it is, in my case, what I want to do is just generate income streams. Just generate, so in other words, instead of saying, well, I'm going to save for my retirement by doing X and Y, I want to generate income streams that are kind of independent of the fortunes of the stock market. So for example, I have a whole bunch of them. I have a podcast. The podcast has advertising, but that's not the main way I make my money. I also have that membership website I told you about. I promote RonPaulHomeschool.com, which is a great homeschool program. And I have a lot of different things that I do. So for example, I have an investment property, but I'm not super knowledgeable about real estate. I just know this property is going to do well. One way to think about how to have additional income streams is to look up John Schaub, S-C-H-A-U-B. And he has a series of seminars where what his strategy is, he locates good locations. He buys a house there. He has a tenant be a renter. The rent pays the mortgage payment every month for you, so there's not that much out of pocket. And then once the mortgage is paid off, now you have an asset that's going to generate income for you, free and clear, in perpetuity. So now imagine if you had not one but 10 of those. So that's one type of strategy you can pursue. Another one requires a much bigger mentality shift, and it's the one I was hinting at before. It's thinking of yourself as a producer. There's an interview of me from years and years ago where I said I didn't have an entrepreneurial bone in my body, and that I'm glad I'm just getting a salary from this college. Oh my gosh, am I mortified by that. My income now is so far beyond the paltry sum I earned as a college professor, and it was because I allowed myself to think of myself differently as somebody who makes things. It doesn't have to be anything physical. I can't make anything physical. If my life depended on making anything physical, I would have been dead decades ago, okay? I'm not asking that. I'm saying that in this day and age, we have tools in front of us that people 50 years ago would have killed for. So for instance, I gave the example of this membership site I have. People sign up and, for an annual subscription, and then if they like it, they just automatically continue for another year and another year and another year. So I'm selling them something, but it's not like I'm selling them a $5 product and then I just cross my fingers, I hope they want another $5 product next month or next year. I don't think I could survive. That would make me crazy. I would hate that. And I certainly don't want to sell them physical products in a retail store these days with the margins so thin and the Faucis everywhere. I wouldn't want to do that. So instead, what I do is, I've already said, I sell courses. Well, think of other ways. There are memberships all around you, because they work. They work. Netflix is a membership. And maybe you don't like Netflix because you don't like some of their movies. That is not the point. Amazon has Prime. That's a membership. And then once you have Prime, they're offering you a membership with HBO and a membership with their horror movie thing. It's membership after membership. It's all over the place. Disney has a membership. Why are these huge companies doing that? It's not because they don't work. It's because memberships are where it's at. And so these days, I'm on kind of a kick on memberships. The expert on this, you can look him up, is a guy named Stu McLaren. He created some software that makes it easy for people to run a site based on something that they know, or a hobby that they love passionately, or something they know from their work, and they teach it to people, and people stay and renew month after month. So yeah, they make the sale once, but that one sale brings in income regularly, so that you're not having a heart attack all the time, month after month after month. And you can imagine how this can be done. So for example, there are people who do this for divorced women who want to learn how to manage their money. There are memberships on how to navigate the real estate market. There are memberships on crocheting. There are memberships on things, how to be a better guitar player. And whatever you can think of, there are communities where there's somebody offering lessons or some content, or there are people who help you overcome grief, and it's a membership. And what you have to do is just think of yourself and think about, what do I know? What am I good at? Or what am I at least passable at? For example, there's an excellent, very profitable membership run by a youth pastor who writes out outlines to his sermons. Well, there are a lot of youth pastors out there, and they're terrible at writing sermons. So they join his membership, and every month they get all the sermons they need. Or there's a math teacher who has to make math lesson plans anyway, so she puts them up on her membership site. And other math teachers join that site, and every month they get math lessons. So in other words, it's almost anything you can think of. Maybe some of you have been to those things where at night you go out and there's an artist in front of the room, and it's a paint night, and you're all painting what that artist is painting, and you're having wine, and it's a lot of fun. It's a paint night. Well, there's a woman named Heidi Easley, and so she doesn't teach you online how to paint. What she's teaching is future business owners how to run a paint night business, because she's an expert at that. Well, you would think that is such a niche market. There's no way she could have a profitable membership doing that. But she does. She has thousands of people on there. Now imagine if that costs only $10 a month. That's at least $20,000 to $30,000 a month doing something she loves and has experience in and knows about. So Heidi Easley did not come from Mars. These other people I've described do not come from another species. So the thing becomes, what is it that I have to share with the world? So, I have a libertarian podcast audience, and a lot of libertarians like to talk about capitalism, the free market, how great it is. It gives free rein to human creativity, unconstrained by bureaucratic red tape and by small minds who don't see the merits of innovation. We love to theorize about how wonderful that is. But when push comes to shove, very few of us have the guts to actually jump in and do it, to be part of it. Instead of just theorizing about it, jump in and do it. Create something. Share your content with the world. It's that mentality you need to get into in the 21st century, unless you want to be a nervous wreck all the time.
So I think the global message is relying on yourself for income is the safest place you can be, and I guess we could say, I can't say no matter what happens, but when adverse things happen, you're in a much higher probability scenario to be able to be fine economically as compared to if you are in a business that's going to get shut down,
Right.
or a retail business, or business that's maybe not immune to government edict destroying it. So thank you for that. Let me ask you this: if I'm going to have you put your historian hat back on, just to kind of maybe summarize here a bit, maybe let's gaze into a crystal ball. So you're seeing the confluence of circumstances, that are emerging right now. And it's not just the United States, but this is a global thing, and we're seeing a really, I think, disturbing relationship between Silicon Valley tech platforms, the pharmaceutical industry, our government, and then maybe even world organizations like the World Health Organization. I mean, all this stuff is starting to, it's like these very conflicted, unholy alliances and support systems being set up to kind of, to me, it seems like they're taking control of things and people. Where do you think this heads? I mean, does this eventually, degenerate into, really troubled times where we could have a lot of civil unrest and rebellion and so on? Or do you think people, it passes and we vote the bums out of office? Because right now, prepping is at a, it's exponential in growth. I mean, people who never would have thought about it before, they're thinking about it now. And it could be those circumstances, it could be the grid, which is vulnerable. We saw what happened in Texas not that long ago. We were minutes away from losing the grid there for 3 months, which would have been a really, really bad scenario. So, you've done enough looking back. How does that allow you to look ahead?
I think right now we're in a transition phase. I was naive enough to think that platforms like, when I look back at what I was saying about the internet 10 years ago, it seems so hopelessly naive. I mean, it's still, let's face it, it is still an overwhelmingly liberating force, even with the big tech problems that we face. I mean, the fact that you can distribute this series to, in principle, practically anyone, anywhere on Earth, is an extraordinary thing. And it makes Gutenberg look like a lazy bum. And so we need to appreciate and be grateful for the things we do have. But I did not anticipate the kind of crackdowns that we're seeing on independent voices. And so where I think this transition period takes us is toward a world in which people who see the world differently each have their own platform. There isn't going to be, there'll still be a general Facebook. People will still like that, and they still want to keep, most of their high school friends will be on there, and they want to see, did this guy turn out to be a bum, or, whatever happened to me. They'll still want to be on Facebook for this or that reason. But they're increasingly already, and yeah, they have some speed bumps, but they're overcoming them. Some alternatives to Facebook. Odyssey, Odyssee, is an outstanding advance on YouTube. And they're not looking to shut you down. And to the contrary, they want to feature any voice at all, not just alternative voices, any voice at all. So I think, in principle, I think a lot of us who think that reason ought to bring human beings together, right? Because reason is the characteristic feature of human beings. It's the thing that distinguishes us from all other creatures, as our reasoning ability. And so you would think that reason, as the ancient Greek philosophers thought, reason is since it is our unique characteristic, it ought to be the characteristic on which we, according to which we live our lives, and we ought to be able to all rally around it and come together along making rational arguments. And it just seems like that's not the case anymore. So I think it's much more likely that we're going to live parallel lives. And what that could also mean, it could mean politically parallel lives. It could mean that ideas that are not even on the table right now, that seem toxic to some people right now, could emerge onto the table. It could be that people of goodwill on both sides, and when I say both sides, obviously the world is a variegated place with more than just two ways of thinking. But when I say two sides, I mean people who think, quote, the experts should be in charge, and people who think, I'll listen to what so-called experts have to say, but I know there are a lot of dissenting voices who are just as expert as the first ones, and the people, the Dr. Fauci's of the world and the resistors, these are the groups I'm thinking about. I think that what we may in fact see is that people of goodwill on both of those sides may say, look, you don't agree with the way we want to run society, and we don't agree with the way you want to run society. Now, we can keep doing this And every 4 years in the US, we can have a low-intensity civil war over who gets to ram his ideas down the throats of the other half of the country. Or we could just say, well, this is juvenile. I mean, why are we treating this arrangement, which is obviously, the United States is a utilitarian, practical arrangement. It is not some mystical, self-justifying goal. It's a thing that if it works, great. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else. That was Jefferson's attitude. Thomas Jefferson. So your problem isn't with me, it's with Thomas Jefferson. He said repeatedly that this, if this works, that's great, but if not, maybe we need 2 United States or 3 or whatever. Why don't we say, you live your way and I'll live my way? And it's so interesting to me that that is not even considered. When you look on the TV news and all the opinions that they allow us to hold, they're perfectly happy if we're arguing about whether masks should be worn indoors only or indoors and outdoors. That's the kind of debate they love. Or whether the top marginal tax rate should be 39.5 or 37. I mean, they couldn't be happier we're having a debate like that. But if we ask a simple, morally compelling question like, if you have 2 antagonistic forces who look at the world differently, who look at the same video clip and see 2 different things going on, why should they be forced to live with the way the other one wants to see the world? Why shouldn't they just live in peace apart from each other? Why don't they just say, well, look, we'll live here, you live there. We'll still trade with each other. We'll still wish each other the best. But maybe we shouldn't be trying to force our worldview on each other. Why don't we lay down our arms in this little civil war we've been waging? It seems to me eventually somebody has to stumble upon that common sense response.
Well, the thing that, and you might be a little bit more optimistic than I am around some of these things, because I don't believe that there's a live and let live orientation. I think the libertarian side is live and let live, right? The free market side is live and let live, but when people want to force you to wear masks, force you to shut down, force you to do fill in the blank, that's not a you can live your way, I'll live my way. That is, you're going to live my way. If you even try to dissent vocally, we're going to censor you. We're going to deplatform you. We're at a point where, and you talked about us getting our series out. I mean, our last series, no social media, been taken down within seconds on any social media platform. Including YouTube. We had to create our own video hosting services to be able to take control of it, so we could send it out. So yes, the internet still provides that for us, but I will tell you that any platforms that are out there are basically antithetical to free speech and thinking at this point, and that's where my concern, I'm not, and I might be wrong, and I hope I am wrong, but what happens is with more and more you have to speak the party line, otherwise we cancel your voice. The good news is that I see and observe rebellion, and that the more that we try, we are getting shut down, the bigger our audience is growing. That literally, the polarization is creating large audiences in one camp or the other. But at the same time, I'm with you. I wish people would just put that aside. But they're forcing the polarization.
Yeah, no, I hear that, and you're giving voice to really the 2 voices in my own head, because the other voice says there's one side of this that might be willing to do that, but there's another side that recalls my days on a college campus. It brings us full circle. We would bring 1 or 2 dissenting voices to campus per year. Every other voice would utter the same predictable platitudes, and why would you even go hear these people? We already know what they're going to say about everything. We would get 1 or 2 dissenting voices, and the campus would go berserk. Yeah. And I thought, my gosh, you people, you have any idea what it's like to be me on your campus? You can't endure 1 or 2 speakers. I have to endure all your craziness 24 hours a day. And I remember thinking, good thing these people aren't in charge of anything. Now they've grown up and they are in charge of everything.
They're in charge of everything.
Yeah. But the way I think of it, though, Patrick, is this. I mean, and I just feel like there's always been, I don't like the glib answer, oh, go start your own social media platform. I mean, I don't like those glib answers. Right. But at the same time, we have in this country, I would say, a solid 80 million deeply alienated people, easily. that is a profit opportunity for somebody. 80 million people, nobody wants to cater to.
Oh no, they're gonna get catered to, and that's what thing. There's gonna be now 2 Facebooks, 2 YouTubes,
Yeah.
but it just furthers. But what that does is, to your point earlier, it's almost like there's 2 countries cohabitating, and what will happen when the Bolsheviks get upset about the fact that people are splitting away, right? I mean, we're going to see. I'm saying that based on the story you told earlier, is that this could get ugly, and I think that's the reason why people are starting to prep and starting to say this could turn to something that's not that's pretty ugly, pretty damaging, and now what do I do to try to be responsible and see that might be on the horizon? And I hope it's wrong. I hope we're all wrong, but I could say that there's a lot of storm clouds forming that are very disturbing to me.
Well, let me say one more thing. There's a fellow named Harry Brown, and don't hold it against him that he ran for president as a libertarian.
I remember Harry Brown.
Year 2000. And I mean, look, I'm a libertarian. The Libertarian Party has some very decent people in it and also some crazies. But Harry Brown was a very impressive person on many levels. He wasn't just like a professional libertarian. He was an amazing speaker. He was an incredible salesman. He wrote a book on sales, and he was just very, very convincing. And he could just sit there, and he was well dressed, he was well put together. I mean, I feel like I'm describing the opposite of everybody I know in the libertarian world. I'm sorry, I'm just kidding. But he was just a very impressive person. And you would have some objection, and he would have some pithy response that just took you out at the knees with your objection. He was just so impressive. And he wrote a book called How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World. Yeah. And a lot of times people think the way for me to find freedom is to make sure that somebody I like gets elected to some office. And what he was trying to say in that book, which is not primarily about politics at all, is that in the colloquial sense of freedom, what it means to be free, to live the kind of life you want to live that's fulfilling with as few constraints on you as possible, can be done even in politically very trying times. That you should not allow yourself to look, even in, you don't have to be naive, but you shouldn't allow yourself to let a catastrophic situation destroy the one life you get. That, well, I guess there's no point in trying because everything's going down the tubes. There are a lot of ways in your own life that you can live a more fulfilling life. And that involves relationships, involves your work, and whether you find that fulfilling. There are a lot of things that you can do. You and I have no control over what the U.S. Senate is going to do tomorrow. There's nothing that you and I can do about that. But what you and I do have control over are things in our own lives, and some of the things that I've been describing in our conversation that you can do starting tomorrow. I mean, I worked on Ron Paul's homeschool program. I created a bunch of courses for that. And that was a thing that I could do for other people, actually, because that thing doesn't just teach them history and reading and all the typical subjects, but it teaches them things like how to build your own home business, or how to be an effective public speaker, or how to write effective advertising copy, which, by the way, if you have that skill, you will never be poor. That's right. And that gives people an unfair advantage. Now, that did not involve politics at all. I didn't have to vote anybody into office to do that. I had to just do it. I had to just seize the opportunity and do it. And so there are ways that you can improve things for yourself and others that do not involve waiting for political solutions. Yeah. So don't allow the dark times that we seem to be in to snuff out your spirit, because there's still so much to be done.
Well, I'll just say this, Tom. Your spirit is abundant and evident, and it's not just the ideas that you share, but the passion behind them that I find really engaging. So I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to share those ideas. I love the fact that you're out there broadcasting in the varying ways that you do. Your ideas in your mind is something that certainly needs to be disseminated throughout the populace. So thank you very much for being here, and thanks for doing what you do.
My pleasure, Patrick. Thank you.
That completes my interview with Thomas Woods. Really great to have smart people with great academic backgrounds in the world today that are sharing their thoughts and their mindsets so that we can all benefit.